Mark Caro, and welcome to episode 63 of Caropop. Our guest for this episode is a guitarist who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with one band and previously did stellar work in another Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band, Jeff Skunk Baxter. Skunk, as he likes to be called, was an original member of Steely Dan and played lead, rhythm, and pedal steel guitar on the band's indelible first three albums, Can't Buy a Thrill, Countdown to Ecstasy, and Pretzel Logic. Those are his memorable guitar solos on My Old School and Rikki, Don't Lose That Number. But then, Steely Dan songwriter leaders Donald Fagen and Walter Becker decided to quit touring and to rely on studio musicians from there on out. That marked the end of Steely Dan as a band, and Skunk needed a new gig. He found it with another group with whom he'd done some studio work and touring, the Doobie Brothers. He joined the Doobies as a full-time guitarist, starting with a 1975 album, Stampede, which featured the hit Take Me in Your Arms, Rock Me. When frontman Tom Johnston was experiencing health problems and the Doobies needed another lead singer, Skunk brought in a fellow Steely Dan veteran, keyboardist Michael McDonald. McDonald brought more of a polished soul R&B flavor to the group and also wrote hits such as Takin' It to the Streets, the title track of his first album with the band. The transformation became complete with 1978's Minute by Minute, a blockbuster album driven by the smash single What a Fool Believes. The band had never been more successful or less reliant on guitar. Skunk left soon afterward. He played with the band Spirit in the 80s, was briefly in a supergroup called The Best with John Entwistle, Joe Walsh, and Keith Emerson, and he did a lot more work with various performers in the studio and on stage. This summer, after all these years, he released his first solo album, Speed of Heat. It includes his rocked-up version of My Old School and a jazzy instrumental version of Steely Dan's Do It Again. The guest vocalists include Michael McDonald, Clint Black, and Johnny Lang. The album has him out on the road with a band that includes his close collaborator, C.J. Vanston. In our conversation, he talks about his work on those early Steely Dan albums, how he composed his solos, and how much control Becker and Fagen tried to impose on the music from album to album. He also says which Steely Dan song he feels is most representative of that period. Hint, it's from Countdown to Ecstasy, which has the loosest vibe of those three albums. Was Skunk upset when Becker and Fagen took Steely Dan off the road and ended that version of the band? Did he expect to become a full-time member of another prominent band so quickly? How did he feel as the Doobie Brothers moved from being a heavy-duty guitar band to one driven by Michael McDonald's keyboards? Why did he leave that band? Is he still in touch with Donald Fagen? Has Fagen heard his new versions of Do It Again and My Old School? What does he think of Fagen touring a Steely Dan without the late Walter Becker? How does Skunk enjoy performing as a solo act at long last? Will I get him to explain the origin of his nickname? He also talks about his day job, doing military consulting and gaming out war scenarios for the U.S. government. If we knew what he knows, would we feel better or worse? Yes, we're reeling in the years with Skunk Baxter. Please enjoy this Caropop conversation. Well, thanks for coming on Caropop. I really appreciate it. I've been listening to your work for a really long time, and it's a real honor to get to chat with you. What is the band like for this tour you're doing, by the way? How many people are you going to have on stage for these shows?
It's four altogether, including myself. Keyboard player is C.J. Vanston, who is I partnered with on this solo project. Brilliant musician in his own right. The drummer, a gentleman named Mark Damian, is an amazing studio guy as well as a live player, but these guys are all just killer studio guys. And then the bass player, singer, is a gentleman named Hank Horton, who is from Lansing, Michigan, and all these guys know each other, actually. And he is a fearsome bass player and an amazing singer to take on the responsibilities of something like reproducing what we did with Michael McDonald and Clint Black and Johnny Lang. He just does an amazing job. He's also a bass player for the Detroit Symphony, so he's got some serious chops. So it's a pretty powerful band.
What's the difference between being a killer studio player and someone who's killer live?
Well, there are a lot of wonderful live musicians that freeze when the red light goes on. It's a different world. Not that you can't straddle both worlds. There are a number of us who do that, but it is a different attitude. It's almost like the difference between being an EMT, ER trauma person and a brain surgeon. There's just They're just different approaches to the same thing with different kinds of responsibility, I guess.
Which one do you enjoy most, and which do you think brings out your best?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's hard to say, which of my great kids do I love the most? I love playing live. It's always been one of my favorite things. But being a studio musician also, to me, requires a certain amount of expertise, discipline, knowledge, and it's a kind of a rarefied atmosphere, and almost like being Top Gun, if your first call. And I think it requires a certain amount of discipline, which I think is good. I like that. I like the idea that when you go in to work, that you're there because people think you're the best at what you do.
When you were in Steely Dan, you were on the 3 albums that they actually were also a live band and weren't just a studio band. So you were able to bring both of those skills to the table with Steely Dan, which is sort of ironic because then later, at least in their first incarnation, they became solely a studio band, even though you excelled at that work as well.
That didn't change sort of my vision and change where I wanted to go and what I was doing in terms of it being a studio musician for other artists.
Sure.
And when Steely Dan decided to not tour, I was actually sitting in a room with a bunch of guys from the Doobie Brothers because I was on the tour with them at Nebworth in England doing a music festival. When I hung up the phone, I said, well, that's kind of it for me and the Steely Dan. And they said, well, now you're in the Doobie Brothers. So the live thing took care of itself, I guess.
Right. And you'd recorded with the Doobie Brothers too, so you were able to do both with them.
Right. The Doobie Brothers had hired me again as a studio. I'd come in and do some pedal steel and do some other things for them before I'd actually become a member of the band.
So I thought it was interesting. Your new album, Speed of Heat, is your first solo album, even though you've had obviously a very long, storied career. You have versions of 2 Steely Dan songs that I think are interesting in that you have a very sort of jazzy instrumental version of Do It Again and this really kind of rock hard, pile driving version of My Old School. And in a way, you're kind of capturing the 2 sides of that Steely Dan coin, the sort of jazzy side and then the rock side. Were you consciously thinking that when you did that?
As far as Do It Again is concerned, I would say it was just a fun foray into seeing what would happen if you took a really cool Steely Dan song like Do It Again, turned it inside out and upside down, turned it into a shuffle, and had some fun with it. So I think it was more looking at what was best for the song than were we going to do a much jazzier or a much swinging version of it. My Old School definitely was vectored in that direction. I used to sing the song live when I was in Steely Dan, and the more we played it, the more energy it accrued as we went on the road. And I always thought this song could certainly support a much more focused, hard driving, as you say, rock feel. And so when I wrote this arrangement, I felt really comfortable it would support it. And I'd actually asked Steve Tyler to sing it. I sent it to him and he said, well, who's singing it? I said, well, that's me. I'm just doing it as a scratch vocal. So you have you can figure out where we are in this thing. Well, why don't you sing it? Because I'm not a singer. And he went, well, you should sing this. I said, come on, Steve. And he said, I'm telling you. So I said, all right, I trust you. You're a friend. You got, you know more about this than I do. So I kind of took a shot at it. And I guess the experiences and the amount of time doing it I had under my belt kind of helped me with the performance.
Right. Did you re-record it at that point, or did you use the vocal you sent to Steven Tyler?
I re-recorded. I thought, okay, going to settle down here and see what I can do.
I was pretty young when Do It Again and Reelin' in the Years came out, but I knew those songs from AM radio growing up. And then I heard My Old School like later on FM radio and then getting Countdown to Ecstasy. And I was like, well, why wasn't this song a huge hit? This song is catchy as hell. Did you guys think that My Old School was like, the next big hit? And did you even think about stuff like that?
I don't think we've thought much about that because, for one thing, we were amazed that anybody cared what we did. There was a period of time where when you are in a band with no name and your best demo was a song called Dr. Udo's Proto Man, we found a less than enthusiastic response from most of the record business. And well, of course, the way everything is once you have a success with it, everybody wants a Steely Dan band. But we didn't really think much about what was a hit, what wasn't, what we were doing for radio. We were as surprised as anybody else that Do It Again was getting the kind of airplay that it did. That certainly wouldn't have been my first pick, but you never know. We just didn't say, okay, well, we're going to do this with AM radio in mind, and we're going to do this with FM radio in mind. We weren't even sure what Steely Dan was yet.
Record Store Day earlier this year released an album, Long on the Shelf by Linda Hoover, which the first side of it is, songs written by Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, and you're on it. Denny Diaz is on it. Gary Katz produced it. Was this the first sort of Steely Dan project? And do you guys know you were Steely Dan when you made that record?
No, we didn't. What we did know was when I went down, I was living in Boston and I was commuting back and forth to New York to do session work. And when I went into the studio, because Gary had said, there's this group of songwriters that I'd like you to come and work with. And we're doing this project with a lady named Linda Hoover. So when I went down there, we were about halfway through the record. And Donald said, hey, I've never really heard anybody that plays guitar like you and on our material. And I said, well, I've never really ever heard material like this. This is really cool. So we said, okay, whoever passes go first sort of gets in touch with the rest of the folks, and maybe there's a way we should get together and form some kind of a musical organization. So when Donald and Walter came out to Los Angeles to pursue a publishing deal with ABC Dunhill Records, that's when they said, okay, sort of the flare went up, the bat beacon went up, and we all said, okay, let's think about forming a band. We were trying to figure out what to call it. It was a tough call. It was either between Big Nardo in the 8th grade or Steely Dan, and we figured that Big Nardo in the 8th grade was too long to fit on an album cover.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a mouthful. Yeah, and if people have read William Burroughs, it has kind of a fun meaning too.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't realize that Steely Dan had a single before Can't Buy a Thrill, which was the song Dallas that the drummer Jim Hodder sang, and then came the album. But it seems like Donald Fagen was sort of insecure about being the lead singer, in that he had David Palmer singing stuff, and live he was doing even, David Palmer was singing even more of it. Did sort of Donald Fagen's kind of attitude toward himself as a performer change over those 3 albums in the years you were together with them?
Well, certainly, as the material that he performed the vocals on became successful. I guess I can understand that now that people have sort of accepted my vocals on this version of My Old School. I'm spending a lot more time trying to develop that side of my musical personality, and I've got a lot more confidence than I did before.
Right. Well, and so much of music too, and like when you're writing the lyrics, hearing the guy sing the lyrics with that spin that he's intending them for, it's hard to imagine anyone but Donald Fagen, singing those original Steely Dan songs a lot of the time, because it's him and his voice and his words and and their chord changes and everything. It all fits together.
Well, it didn't seem to bother Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan, or they. Right. I can't say that they were the Pavarottis of American music. Style is like anything else. People, if they like something, they then begin to like the way it's performed. And they look past whatever prejudices they may have, and they look into the material.
When you guys started, how much leeway did you have in doing what you wanted to do with your solos, or slide guitar playing, or pedal steel, or rhythm, or any of that? Like, was it a band sort of figuring out the arrangements, or were Fagen and Becker already kind of like, this is what I want everyone to play?
Well, as songwriters, they certainly had some vision of what they wanted, but there was really no way that Donald or Walter could tell me what they wanted on pedal steel, because they just didn't understand the instrument.
Right.
So it was okay. I'd like to try pedal steel on this. I think this will work real well. And it was the fact that we were a band, and there were very talented musicians in that band who had a strong musical background and history, and were able to bring good musical knowledge and application to the project. For the first 3 records, a lot of it was coming from the band.
And those albums sound like they're played by a band. Can't Buy a Thrill, Countdown to Ecstasy, Pretzel Logic, 3 fantastic records. Was there much of an evolution in how they approached the band work? I know there was a little more session work on Pretzel Logic, but was there a distinct change, or did it all feel of a piece?
Well, I think that because of the success of Steely Dan, I think Becker and Fagen felt that they now were on a pathway where they could exert more creative control and input into their songwriting, into the performance of their song, which is kind of a natural progression. It makes sense to me. And being a studio guy, I had no problem with a lot of my colleagues coming in and playing. I thought that was kind of cool. Just didn't really think about it much, because I was doing so many other sessions. It was almost like, this is another project,
Right. So My Old School, you have a fantastic guitar solo on that. Is that still, you just having the space to do what you want and express the way you wanted to express it?
Yeah. They wanted a guitar solo, or a number of guitar solos. That's pretty much it.
Tell me about your approach to soloing in general. I'd read that you were really influenced by the jazz guitarist Howard Roberts, and placed an emphasis on melody as opposed to virtuosity. When you have a solo, how do you look at how you want to perform that?
Well, I certainly am a melody guy. The Ventures were a major influence as well, and their whole thing, if you want to call it that, was melody. They would take songs, except for Walk Don't Run, although they played the original melody for Johnny Smith's, which was the original version of Walk Don't Run, without changing it very much. And they were all about melody. Howard Roberts was about, I guess, and I did something at the Grammy Museum last night, and I was talking about Howard. His music, everything that he did, the beginning of what he did was opening a door and welcoming you, as opposed to hitting you in the face like a Charlie Parker or John Coltrane or Dizzy Gillespie with a barrage of incredible notes. Now, that's not to say that the formula for bebop is a theme, a melody, and then improvising over that set of chord changes and that melody. But to me, melody is something that's really important, because human beings are naturally drawn to pattern association, and they form patterns and they look for patterns. And a good melody is a way to at least start off any kind of a musical statement. And for me, a solo is really a mini composition. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It should start somewhere and should end somewhere. It's a composition within a composition. So for the most part, I look at soloing as an on the fly composition. Now, there are times when it's just, go for it. But for the most part, no, I definitely say I think melody is important. And when you say, as opposed to virtuosity, the more vocabulary that you have any instrumentalist, it's like the difference between, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Okay, well, that's fairly simplistic. That's kind of like a basic pentatonic scale, playing the blues. Or you could say Jack, a young man who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks and really didn't have a tremendous amount of opportunity in his life, was going up this hill to fetch a pail of water because his family didn't have plumbing. And he found it necessary as part of his duties to the family, and so on, where you take vocabulary and you begin to flush out and make the story more interesting and more in-depth and a little more sophisticated. So your ability as a virtuoso musician to be able to use your vocabulary to do that, I think the two are inseparable.
Right. Yeah, I'd read that you studied classical piano when you were like 5. Is that something that influenced, your guitar learning as well? Like, does being proficient on multiple instruments sort of add to everything?
Well, the piano is certainly the centerpiece of Western music in terms of it's sort of the supernova, the mine from which one extracts all kinds of different elements and material. So to me, the piano is a huge part of everything I do. And a lot of the melodies that I learned as studying classical piano, I've actually used. I remember when I was in the Doobie Brothers, we had a kind of a running fun where I was wearing headphones on stage simply because, to me, 50,000 people or 3 people, I want to get a good mix, sit down, play. That's just the way it works for me. And after all the kind of crazy stuff where I was getting the basketball scores and all other stuff coming through the headphones from these guys, 2 of my guitar techs, Tim McCormick and Mark, they would write a song on a piece of paper, slip of paper, and they'd put it on the piano where I was sitting next to Michael. And I'd have 30 seconds to incorporate that song into the next solo. So whether it was Beethoven's Sixth Symphony or Baubles, Bangles, and Beads, or These Are a Few of My Favorite Things, or, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, whatever it was, the idea is you got 30 seconds. And I really enjoyed that because to me, that's part of your musical discipline. And it opened up all kinds of opportunities. And that's where your vocabulary and your virtuosity comes to play, because you need that to be able to do that.
When you talk about the solo being its own composition, when you listen to Rikki, Don't Lose That Number, your solo on that is like, you don't think of it when you're listening to the song like this is like a separate song, but there's so much melodic stuff going on in that solo that takes it to, places that the verses weren't taking it, that's really fantastic. And you sort of listen to that album and you listen to that song and you think that's a great solo, and you don't really necessarily understand why, but if you sort of break it down, part of it is because it's just sort of bringing so much more into the song than was there before. Is that something that you sort of toiled over? Like, did it take a lot of takes to get to where it was? Were you writing stuff out, or was it like the band playing and you coming up with that solo?
Well, I built it for sure, because that particular solo was really a composition. In the beginning, I thought it would be, again, an opening welcoming to look at the blues and also to repeat phrasing in the beginning, so that would bring people in right away. They would immediately have settled into a comfort zone. The 3 opening riffs, if you would call it, are different notes but the same phrasing. And then the second half superimposes a substitute chord progression over the original chords of the song. So that takes it immediately away from sort of the blues. Then we would take a foray into something a little bit more outside.
When you finished that and, listen to the playback, did you think, wow, I really did something pretty special on that one?
I'm not sure if that was exactly my words, but I certainly was happy with it. I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to say.
Are there any other solos or, parts that you did in that band that you look back on and you think, oh, that's really, one of my favorites, even if people don't necessarily recognize it as such?
Well, I think some of the most fun that I had was with East St. Louis Toodaloo, the Duke Ellington song, because we were all big fans. I was listening to Duke Ellington when I was a kid, my dad's record collection. It was sort of everybody walked into the room and said, okay, everybody pick a solo and pick an instrument that you're going to do that solo on. So I said, okay, I'm going to take the trombone solo and I'm going to play it on pedal steel, just simply because I want to. I want to see how that works. That was a lot of fun because that was taking a specific composition by somebody who I admired very much and translating it to an instrument that the original composer probably never even heard of. And I don't think it was even invented at that time. So that was kind of fun.
By the way, I feel like Countdown to Ecstasy is sort of this sleeper in the Steely Dan catalog. I really love the vibe of that record. And it feels like it's sort of a looser, like not looser, like you guys aren't playing tight, but just looser in terms of the structures and, the freedom everyone has to sort of stretch out, on songs like Boston Rag or Your Gold Teeth. What was the vibe on Countdown to Ecstasy?
And we had some success by that time. And we knew that we weren't just beating our heads against the wall. And it was an opportunity to, I guess the best word I can think of is flourish, to be able to indulge ourselves, I guess, in some way and open our horizons a little bit more for all of us. I think that album is not the best because that's a very problematic word, best. But there's something about that record. I think Razor Boy is probably the quintessential Steely Dan song.
I love that song.
I think that there's something about that incorporates all of what Steely Dan could do, I think.
That's you on the pedal steel on that one, I assume.
Absolutely.
Coming out with Showbiz Kids as your big single after Reeling in the Years and Do It Again, as opposed to having, My Old School, your first single, it is a little bit of a challenge. Like, okay, we're going to throw this down now.
Again, I think that those were still the days when the record business, when there was such a thing, was driven by record executives who were smart folks, who had experience and had what we call ears and would do their homework in terms of surveying what radio was interested in, what they were playing, and what radio wanted to play. And that's pretty much how those records were chosen. The president of the record company just didn't say, wow, this is going to be our next single. There was a lot of single release. There was a lot of thought put into that. So those songs were released based on what at the time seemed to be a logical process. I thought Dallas was an incredible song. And it was interesting to hear other people who did it, Poco and other bands, do it. It's a very catchy hook.
Yeah, it seemed like Becker and Fagan were kind of dismissive of it later, but you go back and listen to it and you're like, oh, no, this is a solid song.
Yeah. Well, I think they were afraid that the band would be thought of as a country Western band. So it's okay.
Were you disappointed when they decided to, basically break up the band and say, we're not, we're just going to work with other people and not tour anymore?
Well, it was, of course, it's a little disappointing. It was something that you put a lot of time and effort into and a lot of care. But on the other hand, I guess I don't mean to sound hard-edged, but by the time we got to the third album, I was probably doing 3, 4, 5 sessions a day when I wasn't working with Steely Dan. So it's almost like it had become certainly something that I cared about, but there was so much else going on in parallel that I didn't really feel, I guess I didn't feel like things were slowing down. It just seemed like a natural progression. And I was still in the Ronstadt's band at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And touring with the Doobie Brothers. So it, again, maybe there was just so much going on. I wasn't really as aware as I might have been. I don't know.
Did you think you become a full-time member of another band so quickly and one that's, also so successful?
No, none of that was planned. That just happened. I didn't know where it was going. I felt that I was probably going to do a lot more producing and keep doing sessions because I really enjoyed the whole studio musician vibe. I enjoyed the discipline. I think for me, in a world where many of my colleagues were, how shall we say, overindulging in the fruits of their labor, to me, it was a governor. Which kept me from really going over the total crazy edge that one could in the rock and roll business when you were very successful. A producer doesn't care what band you're in, how many gold records you have. You show up at 9, downbeats at 9:15, and you play it right or you're fired. Simple as that. And to me, that was maintaining that ability and that capability was more important than anything else.
The first Doobie Brothers album you were on was Stampede. I looked up the album music review of Stampede, and it says, "Talk about greatness. The Doobie Brothers with Jeff, Skunk, Baxter added to their lineup delivered their best album to date." So they're definitely throwing it your way. What were those sessions like compared to the ones you'd become used to doing? I mean, obviously with Steely Dan, and then you've been doing other session work as well. But was there anything distinctive about doing these Doobie Brothers sessions?
It was like being in a band again. It was only a different group of musicians with a different outlook and a different style, and also the fact that the band was beginning to expand in musically, and hopefully I brought something to that added another dimension to it. And they're all very talented musicians. No problem adapting to anything, frankly. I mean, you listen to Living on a Fault Line. That's an amazing record from a group of musicians who probably didn't know at the time or weren't aware of just how good they could be. So I think it was the beginning of the genesis of expanding a musical vision.
Right. Yeah. Well, you had Tom Johnston, who was the lead singer and played guitar as well, and he was having some health problems. So it seems like there was a lot of uncertainty around there where he was not as there, and there was sort of more of a feeling of everyone kind of having to step up, and maybe that added to the kind of more group ensemble nature of the music.
I think that makes sense. Again, showing the depth of talent that was in that band that maybe hadn't been as nurtured before.
And you're the one who brought Michael McDonald in, right? I mean, basically, you're the two Steely Dan alumni.
Yes, I brought Michael in kind of at the last minute to fill in for Tommy, who was having some very severe health problems at the time. And sometimes you got to make a command decision, right?
Well, it's so interesting because you look back on it, and it seems like one of the kind of great transitions in rock where, the band was very, successful, artistically and commercially, with Tom Johnston, and then took on this sort of different identity and yet still had this life afterward. Did you anticipate how much stylistically the band would change with, the addition of Michael?
I don't know if I had a complete vision of that, but bringing a keyboard player into an all-guitar band, I knew that there would be some fundamental changes, simply by virtue of the addition of that kind of instrument. And I didn't have a vision, but I was thinking that Michael as a singer who was just beginning to blossom as well. And even though I called him because I had a lot of confidence in his playing. I had given some thought to the fact that this could become permanent, that this might just work. And after the rehearsals that we did in New Orleans, after we had to cancel the show and then came back and did the show afterwards, during those rehearsals, it was very obvious to me that this was going to work. Personality-wise, everybody was comfortable. They were comfortable with Michael's interpretation of some of the original tunes. And every once in a while, we would, go off and sort of jam a little bit and play some other stuff. And I think people began to realize just how talented Michael was.
Seems like a song like Taking It to the Streets is, in a way, it's a bridge because it's still a rock song. Still sounds like the Doobie Brothers, but you have Michael singing it, and there's more of the keyboard in there. And then later, on the album Minute by Minute, something like What a Fool Believes is really just a full-on keyboard song and not a lot of room for you putting in your guitar and that sort of thing. But it's also an undeniable song. Did your enthusiasm for all of this sort of change as that shift was happening?
Not at all. I said. To me, again, I don't feel like I have to be in everybody's face. I mean, Taken to the Streets is basically a gospel song. And certainly there's not a lot of guitar playing in any gospel music. But there is, and it's supportive. I suppose for me, it's the question of what's more important. Me putting a sparkler behind my ear or being a part of a really good piece of music. I remember one time Gary Katz, who was the producer for Steely Dan, and Linda Hoover had called me and said, listen, I'm at the end of this album with a young female singer. I need you to come in. I need you to bring everything you got. Because in those days, when you came to a session, your cartage company brought 20 guitars, 5 amps. You didn't know what they were going to ask for or what they needed. So bring all your stuff, come in. I need you to listen to this record, top to bottom. So I listened to the record, and after I left the last song, I said, Gary, doesn't need anything. It's just fine the way it is. And he said, that's why I pay you triple scale. So to me, it's not, I'm comfortable. I don't have to, jump on a trampoline or put a sparkler behind my ear. In terms of any kind of music, whatever contribution I can make, sometimes it's just being there. I produced a number of albums, and on most of those records, I had Steve Cropper in the studio with a guitar. Whether he even played it or not, I didn't care. I just wanted Steve in the studio.
Right.
Because there was something about his presence. The guitar playing was almost, tangential. I think people get the wrong impression because there certainly is a lot of ego in music. There has to be. Otherwise, you can't translate what you feel into something that other people can relate to. But I'm really about the song. I'm about the music. I don't care.
What was the reason after Minute by Minute that you decided to leave the Doobie Brothers?
I think as a change agent, you need to realize when it's time to move on. Bringing Michael into the band for a lot of people was traumatic. There were people that were very angry. This is not the Doobie Brothers that I know. Well, I'm sure people felt that way about Fleetwood Mac or other bands that had a hard look and decided that they were going to see what else there was out there in terms of music. So you just need to know when it's time. And there were a lot of other things happening. I was starting to get much more into record production. Again, a lot of session work, and especially spending a lot of time in the world of electronics, working for Roland and Fender and Gibson. And because I built guitars and repaired guitars and customized guitars since I was very young, and sort of honed my skills with Dan Armstrong and that crew, Bill Lawrence and those guys. So sometimes it's time. You just need to know.
Have you thought about, or been asked to do any of the sort of the reunion stuff with Doobie Brothers? I mean, I know you're inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with them, and I'd love to hear how you felt about that happening. But I wonder if you thought also it would be nice to be on the road with them again, or whether that's just something not interested in.
Well, I was extremely honored to be nominated and to be inducted. I don't have the attitude of, oh yeah, well, I'm so cool. That's just whatever, I'm not the anti-poet or that sort of 60s reclusive underground, revolutionary. And as far as going back and playing with the Doobie Brothers, to me, life is like a series of chapters. And you open a chapter and you close the chapter. And I don't know, I'm pretty happy. I'm having a really great time here, doing what I want to do. And I have a great day job, which I love. And so between the two, I don't even know if I could do that, frankly.
And you did have Michael McDonald on your new album as well.
Yes, actually, it was originally going to be an instrumental record. When I was a kid, Apache and all these songs were part of my repertoire and part of the joy of a guitar playing. And I was up in Santa Barbara doing a charity event with Michael, a musical charity event. And he asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm going to check out this solo thing. And he said, well, if you'd like me to do something on the record, I'd love to. And I went, as I say, it took me 1 femtosecond to make that decision. And that led to when I ran into Clint Black up at a function in Central California. I'd known Clint for many years, and he asked me the same question, and I told him what I was doing. He said, well, if you want some help on it, I said, absolutely. This should be a lot of fun. Clint and Johnny Lang, the same thing. The only criteria was that you needed to write with myself and CJ, and you needed to try something that was way out of your wheelhouse. And you listen to Michael's performance, actually the whole composition of My Place in the Sun, that's very different than anything Michael's ever done. And Bad Move by Clint Black, that's completely 180 degrees from anything that Clint's ever done. It just goes to show the depth of their musical abilities. So it was great having Michael on it, and Clint and Johnny.
Right.
And,
well, you're getting people to stretch while you're stretching, so that makes it more of a sort of experience for everyone.
Well, also I thought, okay, part of the fun of this is going to be seeing where it goes, because for many artists, I would posit that for Clint in the Nashville genre, it might be difficult for him to stretch because people had expected certain things from him, record companies, management. There are certain expectations, and I thought, okay, well, these guys are my friends. I'm gonna offer an opportunity for them to try something. If it doesn't work, there's no consequence. We just shelve it and that's it. But if it works, this is doing something for your friends. And I think it worked.
Have you kept in touch with Donald Fagen at all?
I haven't talked to Donald in a while. It's been quite a while.
So as far as you don't know whether he's heard your versions of Do It Again and My Old School on this album?
I don't. I should probably give him a call and rattle his cage a little bit.
What do you think about him touring as Steely Dan without Walter Becker?
I don't know. Makes sense, I guess, to me. There are a number of bands that tour that only have one or two original members. Seems to do well. I don't know. It makes sense to me, I guess.
Do you think Walter Becker was more talented as a bassist or a guitarist? It seems like he was playing bass when you guys were together, but then he's doing leads later in the catalog.
I hesitate to make any kind of creative judgments on anybody. I think Walter was, like we all were, wanted to explore music through whatever vehicle he felt comfortable with. So that would be a tough call. Was he a better bass player than a guitar player? I don't know. People, was Buddy Holly a great guitar player? Would you hire him on a record session? No. Was he a great guitar player? Well, it'd be tough to argue that he wasn't, because he was very successful at what he did.
Right.
So whatever his guitar contribution was, if you took that away, it probably would have changed everything. So
anyone who comes up with Peggy Sue is good with me. So,
yeah, I just think it's in a world where everyone is vying for position and status, and I'm better than you, and you're not as good as I am. I just try to stay away from that, because I think the criterion that people use for that is flawed.
So there's this new $150 audiophile version of Can't Buy a Thrill coming out, and all of those Steely Dan albums are getting that treatment, including the 3 that you were on. Any interest in plunking down $150 to hear this souped up version?
I never really thought about it, because I'm sure I'm going to get a copy of it. So I'll probably wait. I'll probably wait.
All right. You'll have to let me know how it sounds, and if it sounds, different or more like you were in the studio at that point. By the way, I'd read that and I don't know whether this is true or not, that you have not disclosed the origin of the nickname Skunk.
That's correct. It'll be in my book.
I was going to say, just between us, you want to say where that came from?
Well, that's classified BBR, and I don't think you're cleared. So
okay, but your friends call you Skunk at this point, and not Jeff, I would assume. Most
people call me Skunk, and because of my day job, where most everybody I work with has a call sign, it's just perfect. President Bush, when I was working at the White House, called me Skunkster. His dads called me Skunkster.
Tell me about the day job. So you've been doing stuff for the Department of Defense for a while now, and it's this whole other thing you have going on. How did you come into that, and what are you doing right now?
Well, let's see. I have to be somewhat careful. I got into it because I wrote a paper on how to convert a Navy fleet air defense system into a theater missile defense system with an anti-missile capability. That's how it got started. And it just led me down a pathway like all other pathways, to where much of the work that I did, the technical work with radars and missile defense and the associated technologies, there were a number of folks in the military and in government who felt that maybe I had a penchant and a talent for looking at solutions for problems that were somewhat unorthodox. Remember that musicians have an ability to analyze in a nonlinear fashion. So thinking on multiple levels at the same time. So they approach a problem very differently. I mean, basically a guitar solo is just an analytical piece of work. If you break it down into how it would work on a logic tree in the architecture of analysis. So more and more and more, as I got into wargaming, as I got into looking at non-traditional applications of weapon systems, and also got into strategy and tactics, for the most part, they sort of accepted me. I mean, in the beginning, it's always weird. What's this guy doing here? But the real question is, can you walk the walk as well as talk the talk? And I guess after 25 years, it seemed to be everybody's pretty much happy with what I do. And what I do now is, I can talk a little bit about it, a lot of wargaming as a red team member, as the adversary. Much of my expertise has to do with space warfare, has to do with the technologies of things like high energy lasers, future weaponry, and also the application of non-traditional tactics in a conflict.
If we knew what you know, would we be more or less anxious?
Oh, well, let's just say that the world is in flux. I'm not 100%.
We all think that already, but yeah.
Yeah. I am not convinced as to what the outcome will be. I think there was a time some years ago when the United States was a recognized and true superpower that had the ability to steer and influence the world. I think the United States is beginning to lose that advantage. And whenever you begin to alter a stable system, you then open the door for entropy. And the very definition of entropy is chaos.
Right.
So it certainly is of concern to me. Let's just put it that way.
What thing would you most like to see happen now to stabilize the situation?
Well, this sounds like I'm going back to the 60s, world peace. I sound like a contestant in Miss America. I want world peace. I would like to see some adult supervision, and I would like to see the parties involved look at survival and the future as not as a zero-sum game.
Right.
And begin to see that there are, and we've certainly seen some of it in the idea of, understanding climate change, what human beings might be able to do to alter the environment on the planet. I don't want to get into a discussion about environmental peace, because I think that whatever your position is, doing anything that would improve the environment is a good thing. Whether the argument is that it's man-made, whether it's not man-made, I don't think that's relevant, frankly. I think what's prescient is do something constructive. And then if folks around the world decided that the most important thing was basically what we all agreed to sign up to when we took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, the individual is the most important factor in all of that, not the state. So I think the revival of the importance and the relevance of the individual by everyone in the world would be a wonderful thing, because it's individuals that write music. It's individuals that paint beautiful paintings. It's individuals that write books. The freedom to do that is a necessary function. And if the world is run by the state where the individual is subsumed, all that goes away. When was the last time you bought a North Korean record?
No, I know. Or seen a North Korean movie. It's
yeah.
If there are some Iranian
a North Korean pair of shoes,
Well, there are some Iranian filmmakers who are wonderful and are now in prison. So
why are they in prison? It's because the state has decided that the individual's rights are subsumed. It's not, the individual is not important.
Well, I'm with you on the importance of being able to keep individual rights going, and not have the state be, getting involved in our personal lives. All right, I'm going to end this on a music question, and then I'll let you go. You got to run out of your house real fast, and you can only grab one record. Could be a single or an album. What do you grab?
Gee, well, the good news is it's all on my computer, so I grab my computer.
Ha.
I guess.
Where you're going just has a turntable. It could be a CD player, I guess, or an MP3 player. I don't know. Grabbing an MP3 isn't that romantic, though.
No, that'd be hard to say. It might be Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. It might be Dirty Old Bossa Nova by Howard Roberts. Man, I'd have to, I just scoop it up and stick it in my pocket.
I asked this question early on of Bruce Thomas, who is Elvis Costello and the Attractions bassist, and Dave Gregory, who is guitarist for XTC. And they both are, the first album both of them mentioned was Countdown to Ecstasy.
Well, when you say a record, I thought you were talking a particular cut.
No, just like a record. Like it could be an album, could be a single.
Oh, okay.
But I thought it was interesting that I had,
album, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. You could grab your, Buddy Holly box set if you want. But I thought it was interesting that the people I asked this of early, two of them specifically said Countdown to Ecstasy.
Oh, it's a pleasure to hear that, because as you mentioned before, there's something about that record that maybe still there's something about that mine that still has gold to harvest. There's something about that that's unexplored.
I agree. Thank you so much, Skunk Baxter. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you. I've really enjoyed your music for so long, and it's just a pleasure to talk to you here.
Well, thank you for your hospitality.
That's it for episode 63 of Caropop. Thanks again to Skunk Baxter for taking us through his landmark work with Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, and beyond. Look to his website, jeffskunkbaxter.com, for information about him, his music, and tour dates. Also, be sure to check out his Long in the Works debut album, Speed of Heat, which is available on the major streaming services and on vinyl and CD. Caropop is produced by Chris Swake, who does all the dirty work and will do it again next week. I'm Mark Caro. Please follow Caropop on Twitter at Caropopcast. And you can follow me as well at Mark Caro at MarkCaro. Also, visit the Caropop website, caropop.com, for posts about music, movies, and food, and also this Caropop podcast. Please share, subscribe, tell your friends, and tune in again next week for another Caropop conversation. Thanks.